Okay, hey, thanks for coming back to Brian for Liberty. If you are here on the YouTube channel, thanks for tracking me down, and would certainly appreciate it if you took just a second and hit that subscribe button. If you're listening to me on Spotify at Brian for Liberty, go ahead and follow that as well. Again, thank you for coming by and visiting, and we're going to get right into some news this morning. The Prime Minister of England has been moved to ICU. So that's a very sad situation. He has transferred his powers to his foreign secretary. So we just want to send best wishes to him, his family, and all the people of England. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe finally declared a state of emergency in Japan to allow them to start taking stronger steps to prevent the spread of coronavirus in that country. And at the same time, China is starting to lift restrictions on the Wuhan district and allowing life to start returning to normal there. Obviously, that's something that's going to take a significant amount of time, but it's definitely something we want to keep an eye on as we try and move forward. And we've set the date at the end of this month to hopefully start returning life to normal in the United States. How things play out in Wuhan and how they're able to deal with a return to normalcy, and is there going to be a secondary surge of coronavirus there, is going to be kind of an interesting preview for what we could potentially see here in the United States. A couple of things. First, the blame game keeps playing out in the media over the handling of this thing back in January, and what did the president know, and did he act fast enough, and so on and so forth. It's an old trope. It's getting pounded hard by, people in the media, particularly on the entertainment side, but even on, your MSNBC, and they're really beating up on President Trump for this. I'm not going to mention it again, but I wanted it just one last time. Here's what I think this would look like in a perfect world. In a perfect world, if you knew you lived in a world of political sanity, what you would see is Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump behind a podium together apologizing that they both didn't take this serious enough back in January and moving forward as a nation and bringing us together. They may disagree on the solutions, they may disagree on actions moving forward, but if they could just both stand up and say, listen, Donald Trump maybe didn't take this seriously enough back in January. I also didn't take it serious enough. We've got video of Nancy Pelosi at the end of February in Chinatown telling people it's safe to come out. We have Joe Biden's tweet after Donald Trump banned or started limiting travel, I should say, putting travel restrictions on people coming into the country from China, which he did in January. We have the tweet from Joe Biden saying he was being hysterical and overreacting, and he was xenophobic and all these different things. So the president was criticized by Joe Biden for taking action in January. At the end of February, Nancy Pelosi was out saying it was perfectly fine to come out in public. Maybe President Trump should have taken more actions sooner, but I think if you look at the resistance from Democrats at that time to the actions he was taking, it's really disingenuous to go back now and say he didn't act fast enough. So I don't care, Republicans, Democrats, I don't care. But here's Trevor Noah again jumping on this ridiculous, the Democrats had this right. Hey, show me some videos of Democrats back in January screaming for action. But I can show you clip after clip after clip of Democrats kind of taking this thing relatively lightly. But here we go with Trevor Noah again jumping on this thing.
While the U.S. is bracing for an explosion of new coronavirus infections, the White House is also bracing for more backlash. You see, they haven't been listening to coronavirus warnings that they've been receiving for months.
So there you go. There's the clip. And as you can see, he is just being very critical of the president's actions back in January. I just wish we could stop beating this drum and move on. And I'm going to move on. So what we're going to talk about next is just what took place in the state of Wisconsin, my state, yesterday. First of all, I want to just say congratulations to the Republicans in Wisconsin for turning the state blue. There is no way, I just can't see a way that Republicans can defend themselves in the November election for the actions that they took. So a couple of things for those of you not in the state of Wisconsin who don't know, but this is really, it's become a national story. And thank you for making Wisconsin a laughingstock, Republicans in the state of Wisconsin. That's outstanding. Nice work. Essentially what happens is every other state is pushing off their primaries till June. Let's get clear of this thing. And I like June as a time frame just because I think there's still going to be fear. If we start returning to normal at the end of April, there's still going to be a lot of fear out there of this whole people not wanting to get out in public, people still not wanting to be exposed to this thing. So I think June is a good time frame on this. So I do think that that's a good that's a good timeline to allow people to see that life is returning to normal, that we've reopened, and there hasn't been a second wave of exposures. So I think that that's a good timeline. We didn't move ours at all. We're holding it on the regular date. So a while back, about a week or so ago, and I think Tony Evers probably was a little late in his actions here. So if there's a criticism, it's probably that he waited a little too long. But about a week ago, he went to the Wisconsin state legislature and said, let's get absentee ballots into the hands of every person in Wisconsin. I think that would have been a great idea. I think making absentee voting as accessible as possible would have been great, since we had not at that point decided to move the election. I think, again, Tony Evers is open to criticism by saying that essentially the day before the primary, hey, we're going to push this primary back. He probably should have asked for the absentee ballots sooner, and when that was denied, he should have immediately said, okay, then we're going to push the primary back. And that would have given an opportunity for some legal wrangling over this thing, and to give it a little bit more time to play out. So I think because of the way things were done, there was definitely some people caught off guard as a result of what happened here. So that's kind of the issue I have with what Evers did. But what the Republicans did was way worse. First, they denied the request to put absentee ballots in everybody's hands. That is terrible. It's despicable. This is what's going to turn the state blue, and you deserve to lose. You deserve to get kicked out of office. I am a right-leaning libertarian. People who know me know that I tend to side with the right more than the left on most political issues. Because I'm a libertarian, I don't believe that we should force people to live under a certain political ideology or whatever the case may be. But I am right-leaning, so I tend to support the Republicans a little bit more than the Democrats, though I don't have any party loyalty as a libertarian, which is great in a scenario like this because I don't have to try and twist my ideology or sacrifice my principles to defend a political party. And if you're a Republican in Wisconsin and you're defending these actions, take a deep breath and think about what's going on, okay? Tony Evers asks the legislature to send a ballot and put an absentee ballot in everybody's hands. The legislature says no, so Evers says, hey, let's delay the primary then, and then that's overturned, forcing people who want to vote to go out into public and vote. Yes, people could have registered as absentee in advance. There's all those things. I get all of those things. But there's almost no scenario where you weren't going to have tens of thousands of people out voting, okay, if you held an in-person primary. There's just no way that was going to be avoided. You had to know that was coming. So as a legislature and as the Supreme Court and as the legislature, take the action to protect people and say, we are just going to delay this. And it's going to give everybody better ballot access. It's going to give everybody, there's no good reason to hold the primary in person right now. It's a terrible decision. So the criticism he's going to get here from Stephen Colbert.
Oh, speaking of Joe Biden, there was an election today in Wisconsin. Now, despite the fact that every other state has postponed its primary this month or moved to mail-in ballots, at the insistence of the Wisconsin Republican legislature, the Badger State went ahead with their primary.
The criticism that he is going to get here
safely. I think it's a testament to the people who have really thought about this election. They knew what they were doing. They worked really hard to make sure that everybody who is here, the ones who are at the poll place working, the people who are coming in their cars, everybody is here safe. They have very minimal exposure. Actually, there's less exposure here than you would get if you went to the grocery store or you went to Walmart. You can come to a polling place and do it safely. You have the ability to do curbside voting just like they're doing here, even if it's in a different municipality without drive-up voting. You can request that the person come out. They'll deliver you a ballot. They'll check your ID. You are incredibly safe to go out.
What a clown. That actually is the Republican Speaker of the Wisconsin State Assembly.
I can't argue with either of those points. And to agree with MSNBC gives me an upset stomach. But they're just right. And for the the leader of the House here in Wisconsin to be standing out there in full PPE and telling everybody how they're perfectly safe to come. Boy, that's a bad look. That is a bad look, and that is not going to play well in November. That is, you filmed the Democrats' commercial on how they're going to get you out of office. I mean, just ridiculous, just ridiculous. And I would tell Republicans in Wisconsin right now, I mean, God, it's too late now, obviously, but man, when the next election cycle rolls around, these guys are all vulnerable, and we should be moving them out of office. I think that, in what is a relatively red legislature in this state, you are definitely going to see a major move towards the Democrat side. And I think that you took a one-term governor in Tony Evers and helped him with his reelection bid. Just terrible across the board, horrible handling by the Wisconsin legislature. And then here's something I've been talking about a little bit, and that is the $2 trillion stimulus bill, how it came too early, how there's going to be more stimulus, how we don't even know what the economic impacts of this whole thing is going to be. And here's a little piece of news that we got this morning.
The headline coming off it, Trump and Pelosi agree. Another massive aid bill is coming. Joining us now on the phone is Kevin Cirilli, Bloomberg's chief Washington correspondent. Is that right, Kevin? Are we going to see another massive aid bill coming, and when?
Yes, and it's going to come, Guy, as we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks, the earliest April 20th. So the negotiations have already begun in earnest based upon sources that I'm talking to about that April 20th guideline, because that's a moving goalpost, because that's when lawmakers are set to come back to Washington. But there's a lot of question marks, obviously, about whether or not that April 20th Congress will be ready to go to have lawmakers return. The bottom line is that Speaker Pelosi also wants additional funds for government workers in cities and states that were left out of the first economic stimulus, of the third, rather, economic stimulus go around. And the administration wants to see some type of economic plan for reopening over the next month and a half.
That's right. Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump are working on Stimulus Part II, at least $1 trillion. We know that's going to be bigger by the time that comes out. So let's do the math again. I've done it a few times. Let's do it again. We were $23 trillion in debt before this started. Donald Trump signed a budget that added another $1 trillion to the deficit. Then we spent another $2 trillion on stimulus. That's $26 trillion in debt by the end of the year, by the end of this fiscal year. Now we're going to do another $1 trillion, probably $1.5 trillion, maybe even $2 trillion by the time this. We know how government bills work. Everybody's got to add in their pork and make sure they get everything sorted out that they want for their own little districts. So let's be optimistic and say it's only $1 trillion. So that's $3 trillion in stimulus, $1 trillion in deficit added to the $23 trillion that we already had in debt. That's $27 trillion to the national debt by the end of this fiscal year, before we take a look at the economic impact and the reduction in tax revenue because of the massive economic slowdown we're going to see. Folks, I can't overstate this enough. I genuinely believe that there's a chance that our currency, the U.S. dollar, doesn't survive this, certainly not as the world's reserve currency, and potentially a reset of our financial system. Donald Trump's has talked about a payroll tax holiday between now and the end of the year. That is stealing from the Social Security program, and because we're going to have to get that money back later, right? We're going to raise payroll taxes later. How much are we going to have to raise them? What's unemployment going to be like? A tax holiday like that is irresponsible, because you're going to have to make up for that from the general fund at some point, right? So you're going to add that to the deficit, unless that gets rolled into a stimulus bill. But I'm guessing that gets. If that is something that happens, I think that's going to happen separate and outside of a stimulus bill. It's going to be an extra cost on the outside of a stimulus. Or if it does get added to a stimulus, you're going to look at the stimulus being not $1 trillion, but $1.5 trillion. So we are a sinking financial ship here. We are not a wealthy nation. We are a debtor nation. Okay, we are $23 trillion in debt. We are locked into approximately $27 trillion in debt by the end of this fiscal year. Okay, you don't get to call yourself wealthy when you're that far in debt. Okay, let's be perfectly clear. If I'm a doctor and I make $400,000 a year, and I live in a $2 million house, and I drive a $75,000 car and my credit cards are maxed out and I can barely make the interest payments on my debt. It doesn't matter that I make $400,000 a year. I'm not rich. I'm not well off. I am in debt and I am poor and I am a debt slave. And the United States is in that situation. We have this massive dynamic economy that creates all this GDP, but at the same time, we're overspending to an amount that is completely, it was unsustainable before this happened. So again, I can't emphasize enough that I have grave concerns about the future of our economy and about the future of our currency and what that's going to look like, because as we always see, when a crisis hits, it's going to hit the most vulnerable in our society first. The poor are going to suffer from inflation way more than the wealthy. And the closer you are to the printing press, i.e. banks and large corporations, the better you're going to weather the coming economic storm. So just keep an eye on things, be cautious, be careful, and stay safe and stay healthy. Thanks again for stopping by. Please subscribe. And if you're following me at Brian for Liberty on Spotify, please follow. And we will see you guys next time.